again. We're directly opposite the city chambers, the council building. We're going to head down the Royal Mile now. We're onto the High Street proper. This would have been the main shopping thoroughfare for the old town of Edinburgh. Unfortunately, there's quite a bit of roadworks going on at the moment, so we're going to get through these first of all, and then we're going to get through the traffic lights here and onto the bottom part of the High Street. And on this section of the High Street, we can claim that we have the oldest building in the old town. That's not strictly speaking true, because we also have the chapel up in the castle, St Margaret's Chapel, which is the oldest building in Edinburgh. But here on the left is the oldest building on the Royal Mile. Just stop for a second. Nice thing about doing the tour at this time of the day is we're not really obstructing too many people traffic wise. But this is the building I'm talking about. So this is John Knox House. And for anybody who's followed Scottish history, you'll know that John Knox was the Protestant preacher that basically converted Scotland from Catholicism to Protestantism. When they were widening the street back in about the mid-1700s, around about 1764, this was the last building left standing, and for whatever reason the council decided they weren't going to demolish it, which is lucky for us, because this building can be pretty much dated back to the late 1400s, although it came into the ownership of a couple called James Mossman and Maria Arras, and they lived in this in around about the 1550s. So why is it called John Knox House? Perhaps to give it a little bit of historical significance. It's unlikely that he ever lived in it, because James Mossman and Maria Arras were Catholics. John Knox was a Protestant. They were around on the scene at about the same time. James Mossman, unfortunately, came to a rather sticky end after the Lang siege of the castle. As he was the goldsmith and jeweller to Mary, Queen of Scots, he had been minting coins with her head on them. And of course, she was no longer monarch. And so he ended up being executed for this act. And the property itself, as I say, was eventually taken into state control and was named John Knox House. You can see just on the corner there's a guy with a long beard looking up to a sun. Many people confuse this with John Knox, but actually it's Moses receiving the tablets of stone from God. So we're just about to leave the High Street. We're coming up to these traffic lights, and these traffic lights actually sit on the very eastern edge of the original old town. If I just flick this off here for a second and you look at this here, this pub is called the World's End Pub. So called because for many inhabitants of the city, because the wall and the gateway in and out of the city here on the eastern side was directly in front of us, they considered this to be the very end of the world. Many of them never ventured outside the wall because they'd have to pay a toll to get back in, and they couldn't afford to do that. So they remained within the confines of the wall throughout their lives. Just to put it into context, the wall that was actually surrounding the old town was no more than a 1 square mile, which was fine back in the 1500s. Population was only about 10,000. You fast forward to about the mid 1700s, the population was rapidly growing, so much so it was at least 30,000, probably closer to 50,000. So if you can imagine that number of people living within the confines of the wall, it's no surprise that Edinburgh suffered so badly from disease and illness and plague. So we're now onto the Cannon Gate, and this is the last section of the Royal Mile before we head down to the palace.